I always think of it more as if somebody has a foot structure issue, it could have been a loaded gun problem where they've always had this and it wasn't an issue until the injury happened, and now it makes rehab more difficult. But it doesn't mean that you build your whole rehab around this structure that they've had their entire life.
Welcome back to another episode of Past Your Prime, the podcast for active adults juggling training, rehab, and real life. I'm Alex Kiker, Spiker Kiker on Instagram, pro volleyball player, father of two, and the guy who used to think every kind of foot pain was plantar fasciitis. Apparently it's not. There's FDBs and other things out there.
Did you really think that?
Yeah. I didn't know anything about foot pain because every once in a while the top of my foot hurt and the rest of the time it was just fine. And that's gone away, so who cares about your feet? This guy, weirdo with the feet.
I love feet. I love feet.
Okay, who are you?
I'm Craig. I am a physical therapist, and yeah, I like feet.
And a life professional.
I'm a life professional. I give life profession guidance.
Alrighty. Quick reminder, if you like the podcast, share it with a friend and subscribe. It's free, helps us grow the podcast. Today's topic actually came from a listener question. So another quick reminder, if you have a topic you would like us to cover, drop a comment here or submit your question at pastyourprime.com. We've got a little question section there. So what are we talking about today, Craig?
What we have realized in reviewing our different podcasts that we've done, this is going to be number, what is it again?
28?
Wow. 28 in, is there seems to be three types of podcast. One is the clinical aspect of how stuff happens and what to do about it. Two is more the framework, how you guys think about doing it.
Or systems.
Three is actually doing it, the operational, talking to Alex, like the motivation. How do you actually do some of the stuff? And what we realized is Alex does not like the clinical ones.
Well, the feedback that I got was that I just look sad during them. So I'm going to try and look super happy on the video when asking Craig clinical questions for injuries that I don't have, but based on prior podcasts, I will certainly get this injury within the next month. So
I think partially that's your sad face, is because
I know that
you're going to get it.
Inevitable now.
He's totally going to get it. We are going to talk about today something that is a very common type of injury, pain on the inside of your ankle, medial ankle pain, specifically a posterior tibialis tendinopathy / tenosynovitis / something on the inside of your ankle.
Okay, that was a lot.
A
lot of slashes. Why are you slashing so much? Okay, so we're talking about post-tib tendinitis.
Tendinopathy, tendinitis,
yeah.
something, yes.
Tendon problems.
Tendon
anyway.
pain.
So what's the first thing that you look for with the medial or inside of ankle pain?
If you're new to this podcast, one of the things that we really want to suggest is that there's a framework for when you're working through these types of problems. The framework that our team uses at Smith Performance Center is phase 1, diagnosis and home plan development. Phase 2 is symptom stabilization. Phase 3 is tissue capacity and exercise capacity, which we call activity progression. Now, the very beginning piece of any time you have a new issue is that you want to diagnose what the heck is actually going on and causing your symptoms. When you have pain on the inside of your ankle, the big one that I always think of is your posterior tibialis tendon. And you want to see a couple things when you're doing testing on this. First, that there's actually tenderness from where the bone called your navicular, where the posterior tibialis attaches, all the way over your ankle, and then it feeds into the back of your calf, where you'll lose it when you're trying to palpate the inside of the tibia. If you get pain on the inside of your ankle, the posterior tib tendon is the one that you really want to rule out right off the bat.
What generally causes this type of pain? Are there any like common causes? When I think of ankle issues, it's all been from just rolling my ankle every which way.
Well, it absolutely can happen from rolling your ankle. Even normal, like inversion ankle sprains, which you typically think of the opposite side, a lateral ankle pain, where the peroneals are involved. Even in a normal ankle sprain, you can actually still irritate the posterior tib tendon. And your posterior tibialis tendon is so critical for force absorption and controlling your rate of pronation that it can be overloaded incredibly easy. But what I look for is it's typically going to be some level of repetitive exercise and activity where single leg, where you're basically on one leg at a time. It's really common in running, really common in people who are walking. It's so basically everybody, but it's definitely the most common cause of the pain on the inside of your ankle, and it can happen from literally just walking. You go on a trip, go to Disneyland when you take your kids, or you can come back and then all of a sudden you feel that your ankle just got destroyed. And it's kind of hard to tell, and oftentimes it gets missed or really poorly managed. And then people think they just have an ankle sprain when it's actually a tendon injury.
Okay. So how do you actually confirm that it's the post tib that's causing you pain?
Clinically, the easiest one is to palpate the tendon, and it can be extremely tender from the navicular tuberosity where it attaches. It has actually a really large attachment into the, and it goes from the navicular tuberosity and actually goes underneath into the under surfaces of a few different bones in your foot. But you can really palpate it on the navicular tuberosity, and then you follow it up on the medial ankle, and so that whole tendon piece can actually be painful. You also have resistive testing. So if you're sitting at home right now and you have that pain, if you do a calf raise and you feel it, that can actually be a sign that you have a post-hip injury. But the other one is if I'm sitting at the table and I'm resisting somebody, it's when you point your toes down and then invert it. So like if I'm sitting on my back and I point my foot in, it's almost like I'm trying to show the inside or the bottom of my foot.
Mhm.
That's you plantar flexing and inverting the foot. Though those are going to be the muscle actions that really overload it. From there, I like to look at a few other things, but you also have sometimes where you see this in wrist injuries or hand injuries and foot injuries, but you have muscles that actually start up higher. Like so, and if you're thinking about your hand, you have muscles that impact your hand that actually start at your elbow. You have the same thing in your lower leg, and they actually start in the back of your leg or front of your lower leg, and they feed through these tunnels, and they go through these sheaths called the tenosynovium, and these tenosynovium themselves can also get painful, and so you also can see a stretch test that hurts it. So people feel it when they're trying to stretch their calf, and they feel that medial ankle pain. That could be a tenosynovitis along with a tendinopathy of the posterior tibialis.
We've talked about key signs a lot, and I feel like you just mentioned with the calf raise. Is that your typical key sign for a post-tib tendinopathy?
If you're new here, key sign is something that our team will use rapidly to retest to see if we're right on treatment methodology and also to see if something's getting irritated. In that situation, walking, running, single leg jumps, the calf raise, those are fantastic key signs that really typically overload the post tib.
Okay.
Yeah.
Also, with you being a foot person, is this an effect of having different foot structures in terms of either flat feet or high arches, or is that going to contribute to post-tib pain?
Well, do you like feet?
No. No, I try to keep my feet just like nice, healthy, and not looking disgusting. I don't want LeBron's feet by any means.
Yeah, do you double sock?
I double sock.
It's a double sock.
That
Right?
has completely taken away all of my foot blisters.
Okay. I also find it funny when people come in and they don't want to take their socks off because I often deal with people who have they're almost afraid of their own foot to look at it.
Well, and like runners. Like I've heard horror stories. I'm never going to run a marathon in my life. At least I don't think at this point. But like you come out of running a marathon and you're just like, oh, I wore a white sock today and it's red now. That used to happen to me a lot when, playing in basketball tournaments when I was in like high school, that like, I didn't know about my two sock secret back in the day, but I'd wear, a pair of heavy Jordans and play, 6 hours of basketball and come out. And then, the bottom of my sock is just red.
I have had, oh my gosh, I have had where somebody ran through like a creek and got sand into their sock. By the time they got finished, it was like a big piece of raw beef on the bottom of their foot. And my brain, I was basically, I can't help you with this. This is,
I'm not touching that.
I'm not touching that. I would pursue help somewhere else. Now I help set them up with the appropriate provider, but okay, you don't like feet.
No.
Okay.
No.
All right. We got to make sure we keep that in mind as we talk through this. I will use more things that hopefully bother you as we go through this. So the next thing, so when he asks about structure, oftentimes what people think about is flat feet because that's the one that everyone hears about that's supposed to be unhealthy. It's the one that I think makes people think they need orthotics. Flat feet, when you look at some of these larger studies, don't show that you have an increased risk for injury. And in some cases, it's people who have more rigid feet that actually do. So terms that you'll hear will be pes planus and pes cavus. One just being more of the flat foot, the pes planus, where your foot looks like your navicular tuberosities, the bone that we're talking about, is actually flat on the ground. Yeah, that's a flat foot. But in that situation, it just means that your musculature is more important. You may be more prone to developing this injury, but it just means that you need to develop a stronger muscular foundation than maybe somebody who has a more normal foot. Now, the opposite is to have a really, really rigid foot. You see this commonly in the pes cavus type of a foot where it looks like they have a huge rigid arch. You also see in people who have, which is a really common foot deformity, almost so much so that it's not really a deformity, but it's where the first ray is plantar flexed. So if you're visualizing the foot, the first ray is from the big toe, kind of the whole first column. And you'll see that the first ray is really plantar flexed, which will create this really large arch in the foot. Those individuals can also have really big issues with the post tib. So I don't find that it's that useful. It's more useful for me to notice it. And if there's a side to side difference, I care about it. But if this is a new injury and the person's in their mid 30s or all the way up to their 70s, and they all of a sudden have this as an injury, I don't think that's the cause.
Okay, so it's not your foot structure, generally speaking. There may be some that are slightly more prone to it.
Yeah, I always think of it more as if somebody has a foot structure issue, it could have been a loaded gun problem where they've always had this and it wasn't an issue until the injury happened, and now it makes rehab more difficult. But it doesn't mean that you build your whole rehab around this structure that they've had their entire life.
And then you mentioned muscles there before. So are there kind of different muscular structures that get kind of dragged into this?
Yeah, so the posterior tibialis tendon, it controls your rate of pronation. So here's another one. I don't think overpronation is as important as is often thrown out there. I think it's your rate of pronation. So if you have, and pronation is where you basically your foot hits the ground and you go flat, like where your foot goes flat on the ground. That's pronation. Everybody has to do that. So it is kind of funny how often I'll have people who come in and like they'll point out the bottom of their shoe, like on the outside, and they'll say, "Look how worn down this is." It's like that's normal. You should land on the outside of your foot because it sets up your body's ability to pronate and absorb force.
Do toe walkers pronate?
Oh man, toe walkers pronate. They do not. They basically just walk on their toes.
Yeah. I don't know why that just randomly popped into my head.
They do have giant calves. I would have actually predicted you were a toe walker.
No,
Are you a toe walker?
I'm not.
No. It's actually kind of funny. They don't pronate at all. They basically stay up. Their calves active the whole time.
Yeah.
Right. There's quite a few muscles that actually help with that. So you have your posterior tibialis, your soleus, your flexor halis longus, your flexor torum longus, and your pretibials, your anterior tibialis. They actually help to control your rate of pronation. They all work together to do that. And then you have plantar flexors that basically point your foot down. So that's going to be post tib, flexor halis longus, flexor torum longus, your proneus longus, proneus brevis, soleus, and gastroc. Those muscles all point your feet down. If they're not working well together, they can actually cause the post tib, which is the one that has to take the most load because it has the best leverage of any of those muscles, to get overloaded.
The only one of those that I know is the gastroc, and that's because it's in your calf.
Yes. Soleus?
Okay, I've heard of that, but
So
is that the one I tore? Which one did I tear? I think I
yeah.
tore the gastroc.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's
Taurus
why I know
gastroc.
that one so well.
Yeah, on the side he tore, he basically has this big old divot.
It's not as big as it used to be. It's slowly closing.
That's so cool. You're adding like all new muscle.
I have no clue. It still pisses me off, but my calves are my favorite part of my body. But that's all right.
So give me the honest truth though. How did I just throw way too many medical terms in there?
Yeah, I mean, I knew about the FDB, but you didn't talk about that one. You talked about the FDL and
So the flexor hallucis longus. So the ones all the ones I just mentioned, they basically do similar actions. They're just not as good at it. And so in the exam, what I'll look for is calluses on the end of the toe, or I look for the big toe to be super rigid. And because those happen because the other helping muscles that I just gave a whole bunch of medical names for, they're having to do too much because the post tib is compromised.
and those are all pretty much either lower leg or foot muscles that you were mentioning.
They're all lower leg muscles.
Okay. I guess that's slightly helpful.
Yeah. The way I would think of it is you have muscles in your lower leg that point the toe down. Typically, we think of those as the calf muscles, but there's a whole bunch of other muscles that do the exact same thing as the calf muscle, right? So when you're talking about being on the calf machine,
Yeah.
you aren't just doing your soleus and your gastroc, which is what most people think with their calf. You're doing every muscle that plantar flexors your foot. And then if you think of it, you also have muscles that take and invert the foot, and you have muscles that evert the foot. The everting muscles are your peroneals and your EDL, and then your inverting muscles are going to be the ones I just mentioned with the posterior tib. And then the other important ones I'd really like to mention is the plantar intrinsic. So those are the muscles that basically act as a spring on the bottom of your foot. And those do get impacted by the post tib issue as well. That's your abductor hallucis and your flexor detorum brevis. The only reason I mentioned all of those specific ones is because all of those, you would often think with these types of injuries, it's always the same, but any one of those can cause an issue that cause the post tib to be overloaded. And if you don't break down which one it is, you're going to be stuck in this recurrent injury issue, which I call the recurrent injury hell.
Which is where I live.
Yes.
Speaking about calves, from what you've said, there's a little bit of a difference in terms of, I don't know if you want to call it calf tightness or just calf issues that can be raised with this one. What's going on there?
Well, so there's two compartments on the back of your leg. One is the more superficial compartment that houses your soleus and your gastroc. And then deep to that, that's going to be the muscle. That's going to be the compartment that has your posterior tibialis, flexor hallucis longus, and your flexor digitorum longus muscle bellies. And so you can get this like deep, almost achy tightness. That's actually the muscle belly of those muscles. And so you may not be able to get it with like a massage stick or massaging it. You may not actually be able to touch it. And it may be able to, so that could be a sign that, oh man, maybe it's not my calf muscles that are hurting me.
Got it.
Yeah.
So where do you start treatment wise for post tib tendinopathy?
Well, so the beginning part is just I really like to cross friction the painful tendon. And it's wild how often you do that cross friction over the tendon and they'll be completely symptom free when they walk out. I mean, I'm not saying that it won't come back. I absolutely 100% think it would come back. But then if they have complete resolution of symptoms, my brain is already thinking, okay, I just modulated their pain so much that it's, if you guys remember when we talk about pain mechanisms, I'm really thinking it's mostly nociceptive. There's no nerve involvement and they have a normal response to pain. So I really think, okay, this person's gonna be very responsive to treatment. If they don't have a immediate and full response, my brain's already started to think that there's been some secondary changes that are gonna make it a little bit more difficult. But I really like to start with the hands-on piece. From there, I like to target all the muscles that support what the posterior tibialis does, which primarily it's going to be controlling the rate of pronation, inversion, and plantar flexion. And then after that, I like to go through everything that basically absorbs force. So you're looking when you're walking or when you're doing any loaded activity, there's certain muscles that absorb force. So then it's going to be plantar intrinsics, your calf muscles, your quad, your glutes. Those muscles are really important for force absorption, and weakness at any one of those can actually cause the post tib to be overloaded. And at the very end, I always do a modified lodi taping, which completely unloads the post tib.
So what do you do if the cross friction doesn't take care of it? I know I recently dealt with this with my knee where for my patellar tendinopathy, cross friction helped a lot, but I'm now having, I think they were the extrinsic muscles on the side of my knee that Sarah said were giving me some problem, and she tried to cross friction that area and it wasn't helping, so we moved towards different treatment. Is that similar
It's very
for this one?
similar. So our team calls it the treatment hierarchy. So we don't get hung up on single treatments providing full relief. We typically look for multiple different types of treatments from different types of ideas to feel more comfortable that we have the right problem. So if cross friction doesn't take it away, well then I switch more towards some type of neuromuscular control exercise, and if that doesn't, then I switch to using taping. If that doesn't, then I basically keep on moving until I find something that makes the biggest difference, and then from there we build a home plan. So in that situation, what he was talking about, specific tissue work didn't make it completely go away, and there can be numerous reasons why that's the case. It can be that there's multiple structures that she didn't hit that are actually part of the pain production. It could be that he's already started to sensitize, and so he's peripherally more sensitive. And you can get what's called a hyperalgesia, where he feels more pain than he should, and that may not reduce in the moment. You could also have where the tissue itself, like when we're doing the hands-on, it's not being either done well, or it's like we can't get deep enough, or there's some other aspect of like where we're not being able to hit it. And so then you just pivot and you find what other tools could actually make that tissue feel better, because you can hit it in so many different ways. Our team calls it the treatment hierarchy.
And then that's kind of where, at least for me, the tape came in. We were talking before the podcast, so like I oftentimes lack confidence that things are going to work, and then all of a sudden, wow, that worked. So
It did.
for this one, I taped my knee up, and as soon as I took it off, the pain kind of started to come back. But while I had the tape on my knee, it was amazing. So does taping help with post tib
It
tendinopathy?
does. So we use a modified Lodi, which we'll put the link to how we do it. So if you guys want to try this at home, the modified Lodi is so incredibly useful. The reason taping and bracing, especially with lower extremity injuries, are so effective is that you put so much weight on your legs when you walk that individuals can just literally, just by walking and standing, you can overload these structures, because we just don't realize how much force you're actually having to absorb. So that same thing. So with Alex and his knee issue, the taping basically helped to unload a structure that every time he stands, he is loading. It's incredibly useful, and it's one of the easiest ways for us to actually break through some of these symptoms. Like if somebody comes in and they've had this pain for 3 to 4 to 5 years that they could have had these symptoms for, the tape can actually help to just unload it, but do it in a way that's not as irritating as wearing a boot, basically.
And I'm supposed to keep it taped for about 4 years, right?
4 years. No,
I'm hopeful that that was an exaggeration, but that's what he
no.
told me this morning. So
Typically a couple weeks at the most, and then with tape you just have to be worried about skin irritation, and we try to pivot either towards bracing if it takes more than a couple applications of the tape, and then I feel like we're bringing all these ideas back up, but artificial stabilization at our clinic starts from diagnostic to using it as a crutch to load management to training aid to performance enhancer. And in this phase, we use it really diagnostically. So if it takes away your pain, it's like, okay, we know that it was a post hip injury. We know that using the modified Lodi took the pain away. We now know, okay, we're going to need to make sure that the post hip is getting the support it needs, so that you don't have a permanent post hip injury.
nice.
Yeah.
And what kind of success rate do you see with the modified Lodi taping for post tibs?
It's typically dramatic. We either see full resolution of symptoms, or I mean, and it may not be right off the bat, but over the course of days, as you keep it, because the taping that we actually did a study on this taping that we developed here, and it actually does affect your foot for up to 7 days if you use the tape that we use, which is very stiff, but it can also be incredibly uncomfortable and even cause its own issues if it's not done correctly. but it's pretty dramatic, and it can sometimes be complete pain relief right after you put the tape on immediately, or over 3 to 4 to 5 days. The person will come in and say, okay, it felt progressively better the longer I had it on for.
Because it's kind of unloading the structure.
It's literally unloading the
Yeah,
structure.
that's what I felt with my knee. So I'd imagine pretty similar here.
Same
And
here.
then, like, yeah, I know we just joked about 3 or 4 years keeping it on. Why would you not keep it on forever?
Well, it's the same idea of why I don't think permanent orthotics are that good of an idea, because you basically, to me, paint yourself in a corner. You have to have this structure to make it so your body feels good. I just don't believe that's the case. And if you use permanent orthotics or permanent tools like that, if you turn it into a crutch, which crutches are the last resort, and I kind of equate it to, do you want to walk around with two crutches on your arms to unload your leg? No. Well, that's kind of what you're doing, in my opinion, when you do permanent orthotic use. And what's happened is they typically post your medial heel, so it gives your posterior tibialis a mechanical advantage. Basically, makes it so that that muscle can fire easier. You could do that, or you could just make your post tib stronger. There's reasons why it got overloaded in the first place, and all of those are correctable. And I think in that phase 2, which is where we really try to get your symptoms to stabilize and you don't need us anymore, that's when I see a lot of people buy orthotics in ways that they don't need them.
Okay. You had mentioned kind of the progression from, you know, unloading, whatever structure it is all the way to a performance enhancer. Like, what's the difference kind of in between those for the post tib specifically?
So the post tib initially, if it's really, really bad, you do have to boot it, because you can actually destroy the post tib tendon, and you can get what's called a post tib dysfunction, where the tendon starts to lose integrity and it stretches, and you get this full loss of control and structural changes that can't be saved. And so you can start to get into that type of thing. You need to stop it immediately, and a boot is needed. And that's a crutch. We move from a crutch to loading management, which means you still want load through the tendon. You don't want to completely unload it. So the easiest way to do that is to move from using a modified lodi towards we use this ankle compression wrap, basically, where you basically do the same line of action that the post tib does. So you wrap around the foot, and you basically force your foot into this inverted position.
Mm-hmm.
And so then when you put weight on it, it gets support going into pronation. That would be a load manager. And then a training aid, what I see is that people who've had this injury before, it's really useful if you start to increase your load to use tools like the modified lodi or the brace that I just discussed, to gradually increase load at a slower rate than you may do the rest of your body. So if you're deciding, hey, I'm going to start to walk 20,000 steps a day, and I've only been able to do 5,000, and I've had this injury before, well, you might want to wear tape for 5,000 of the 10,000 steps that you do during that day as you start to build, and the tendon will catch up.
Nice.
Yeah.
And then I think you mentioned this before, but like, how long do you keep the tape on?
I like to keep the tape on 7 days. The thing that we have to worry about is that you get skin irritation. So if it starts to feel itchy or burning, you take the tape off because you have a bad reaction to it. But 7 days is how long the tape will actually still provide support if it's done correctly. And yeah, so it actually has an impact on your arch height, which is really cool, is what we found. But you'll have up to 7 days. Sometimes if people, like, lather up their foot, like, I'm guessing you use a lot of lotion on your foot.
No.
You're not a foot lotioner.
I just don't like lotion at all, honestly.
I don't like lotion at all either.
That's
so
a
funny.
male problem.
Yeah, I can't handle that from the skin aspect. Sarah likes to use lotion, and it's funny. I getting it on my hands, like on my palms, feels so disgusting.
Yeah, I recently found like Trader Joe's has a really nice hand lotion because I've got, dry hands and my hands are all beat up from using different barbells and dumbbells and things like that. And so it's one that, like, within like a minute, my hands feel somewhat normal again. But like, there's been times where I've used, like, those like oily ones, and it's like I'm just greased up. My hands are just greased up for like hours afterwards. It's all over my computer. It's all over my phone.
Sometimes get it put on the back of my hands. I do it like that, and I've seen Sarah just seems disgusted. Like, what are you doing, you goofball? Yeah. That's ridiculous. That's funny. I really thought you were going to be Yeah, lotioner.
No,
I thought you'd put the lotion on and put the socks on.
no, no, no. Oh God,
Absolutely
stop
not.
talking about feet.
Absolutely not.
And then if you can't keep the tape on that long, is that a problem?
It's
Not from a skin irritation perspective, but maybe it's just uncomfortable.
Well, if it's uncomfortable, then it's not the right tool.
Okay.
Everybody doesn't have to do this. It's just the vast majority do. And I would say that is an aspect that often gets missed in rehab is the support tools outside of the treatments. And you can think of it as orthotic treatment, but it's really you're giving this person a tool so that they can still heal when they're not around you. That's why I really like using a tape or a brace or even a medial heel wedge, something to basically unload the structure to make it so that it doesn't hurt as much. Is it totally required? No, but it does make the rehab much easier. And I will have people who come in and they don't have a positive response to it. Okay. It just means that I have other tools that I have to do. So and that's what I'm saying. You can hit this from a tissue, like treatment, specific treatment idea. You can do it from an exercise perspective. I have had before where the correction was actually using what's called the surf strap. So providing really hard external rotation to the whole leg. And it's kind of what your glute medius and glute max do to control. It's called Taylor curl coupling to throw out another medical term. It actually helps to slow down the rate of pronation again. So there's a whole bunch of different ways to go after this. It's just what actually makes it feel better. And that's what I'm going to use.
And Craig's clinic just does such a great job of using that kind of feedback loop to continuously look and retest during your sessions where, okay, if that doesn't work, like we're going to move on to the next thing and see if we can get you feeling better today and then kind of equip you with tools to hopefully make yourself feel better a lot quicker than I've seen at other places at the very least.
Yeah, I think the diagnostic phase in this one is the tricky part, but yeah, thank you for saying that.
Yeah,
But the once you find the right feedback loop, and that's what the key signs for, that's what the repeated treatments for, then it's all about management after that.
great. What does progression look like for post-tib rehab? I think probably looking at the third phase.
Okay, once we get to the point where the tendon's healing and now they're ready to start doing more. So remember, phase 3 is activity progression, and that's where you want to start to do more and more stuff. That's also where somebody like Alex, who has a high exercise capacity, is going to hurt himself the most easily. I like to really think of that's where I really use the idea of taping or bracing as a load manager. That's going to be by far the easiest thing. And that may mean that when you start to do your workouts or you start to do your exercise, you're using the brace more intensely or at a higher tension and then slowly reducing it. That'd be like the first one thinking through the artificial stabilization idea, but then really strengthening your plantar intrinsics, the muscles that plantar flex your foot, the muscles that invert your foot, and all the muscles that absorb force and use your key signs to test if your post tib is having a bad response. That's going to be the one that's like the easiest. But your post tib muscle can easily get overloaded. It can overloaded within a single workout if something gets shut off that causes it to get overloaded.
Nice.
Right. So it's really just making sure that you're monitoring that it has a good tissue response. And if you don't know what I mean by this, you should totally go back to our previous episodes where we talk about what tissues get hurt and the signs that it's not having a good response to your workouts. And then also go back and look at the ones where we've talked about how do you incorporate a key sign into your workouts.
And then how do you know somebody's ready to move on from rehab?
This one has a high risk for coming back. So oftentimes, even when the person's completely symptom free, we really look for things that show your whole leg is functioning well. So just from a base perspective, I think you should be able to do 25 calf raises with no loss of control and no pain. And you should be able to just rep them out. Single leg, full height, both sides. I also think you should be able to balance on your foot for 60 seconds because that's going to put a lot of load on your post tib because it has to counterbalance what your peroneals are doing. I think you should be able to do 20 step downs, right? That's going to show that your quad and glute are really good. And I think you should be able to do whatever activity you want to do and do those tests again at the end of it, and they still are pain free and feel good. If somebody goes through all of that and it looks great, I do like to have a check in with them about 3 months afterwards and see that they can still do that and there's no return of their symptoms. then we know. This one just has a high risk for coming back. I used to make a mistake with this one of discharging way too soon. When I first started seeing patients with this, I'd do the tape. They'd come back in almost symptom free. I may do the tape again, treat it again, and then discharge them. But it was the frequency of them having to return for the injury was super high.
So a couple of months is probably how long it's going to take to
Yeah.
effectively manage this one.
Yeah, it depends on how long it's been going on for too. If the tendon has really changed, like it's very unhealthy, it can take much longer.
Got it. What are kind of some cautionary tales or the biggest mistakes folks are making with post-tibialis pain or tendinopathy?
I think overemphasis on the structure of their foot, meaning that they can't do anything. I think that's a big one. I think people will get talked into using tools permanently that, to me, make them very reliant on a provider, which I think is a mistake. I think that's probably the biggest one that actually drives me crazy. Where you have somebody who goes into a place like Good Feet and they end up spending like $2,000 on an orthotic, that if you do the exercises and you correct some of these issues, it doesn't come back. The other big issue to me is just not realizing that your posterior tibialis and all those lower extremity muscles, they all operate together. So if you have a glaring hole on one and then you fix the orthotic or use like an orthotic, it doesn't mean that you're not going to develop a breakdown somewhere else. So now you correct it for this post tib not having a good place to operate from, and now your big toe starts to hurt because you start to dig your toe in more to try to help, or you start to develop knee pain in the front of your knee because the actual root issue was that your quad was weak and it was overloading your posterior tib. It's like they all work in concert. So I don't like to use tools to mask the actual root problem, and I think that happens a lot.
Alrighty.
Yeah.
Anything else you wanted to cover on post-tib pain today?
Not a lot. How did we do from a overwhelmingly clinical terminology mindset today?
I'd say, you used a lot of terms that I don't typically know or understand, but that's all right. You did a pretty good job explaining them, I think.
Okay. I think that's a good place to finish.
Cool. Well, if your foot or ankle still hurts, you've tried orthotics, stretching, which I know we'll get into in a future episode, rest, and it's still not working, probably got to go a little bit deeper. Make sure you're asking the right questions, testing the right structures. If your provider is not doing any taping or anything, I think in the early stages to try and offload it, definitely a good question to ask. And stop chasing those temporary fixes like I do, because it doesn't work.
And then please let us know in comments if Alex made the face today.
I don't think I did. I tried to look happy.
You did look happy. Yeah.
That's my happy
That's his happy face. All right, guys.
Thanks for tuning in. Like, comment, subscribe, share, follow.
PYP, baby.
Peace.